Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the globalist mainstream media burning desire. It fucking consumes them to dump on Christianity. Every opportunity is taken to go after it, to accuse people of being Christian. If you're Christian, it means you're far right, and if you're far right, it means you're Hitler. So they just love going after Christianity. I'll come back to it in a minute, into some of the sort of the historical reasons why. But this is one of the biggest media companies in the world. Okay, one of the biggest media companies in the world. And what story do they choose to headline? Now, this is a choice they make. What story do they choose to headline? This is the biggest story in the world, okay? It's a priest that's allegedly engaged in, or an alleged pedophile priest and at the time these events occurred, it's a small Australian town, about 10,000 people, small Australian town in the middle of fucking nowhere. This town is 2,000 kilometres from the nearest major town or city, okay? It is in the middle of fucking nowhere. Now, over half the population are local tribal people, so, and then you get people like coming in, say, from the mining work, where they come in and out. Many of them just fly in for the work, the week's work, and then fly out again. So anyway, this is the story. So these events are supposed to have occurred some 20 plus years ago, and in this small town in the middle of nowhere. So why would any media company decide to headline something like that? Now, okay, maybe it's buried sort of somewhere in the religious stuff, or the I don't know, crimes. Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be somewhere. Why not? I mean, there's no reason why they shouldn't mention it or report it. But to fucking headline, this is the biggest story in the world. Fuck. If it was had sort of connections, like it was a pedophile priest that had had a gig around the back of the altar with Joe Biden or something, I mean, then you could sort of say, well, okay, it's got much wider significance. But this is a nothing story in the overall scheme of things, and yet they choose to internationally headline it from this 20 years ago in this fucking one horse town in the middle of nowhere. So now they're clearly gloating over this. We're going to get one of those fucking Christians. He's white, he's male, far right, and so they're getting their rocks off on this one. Now, I got no skin in this game. I'm far from being a devout Christian, or devout anything. But I do have a problem with the way the media and the globalist control media relentlessly goes after Christians, as if they're somehow uniquely evil, and I simply don't accept that. And once you take away that the spirituality of a religion, be it Catholic or otherwise, a religion that's flawed, that's administered by people who are flawed, and if you take that spirituality away, what will replace it? And will it be better than what we have? Now, I used to, as a kid, you get dragged off to scripture lessons, things like that. And even up to, I think, to the age of 14 or 15, you had 1 hour a week at school. It was compulsory. After that, it was optional. But at the time, I thought, what a waste of time. It was bullshit. And clearly there were, some of the preachers, lay preachers that came in, some of them had some interesting ideas about how you could more widely apply right and wrong. One teacher came along and said, if you arrive 5 minutes late for work, you've engaged in theft, you're stealing, and therefore God will frown upon you. And even as a kid, I thought, that's a stretch. Nonetheless, for its flaws, and it had them, was it a bad thing? Was the spirituality and the aspects of conscience that it taught, were they bad things? No, they weren't. I think they were good things. And even today, I think about the stories from the Bible, the Good Samaritan, or the mob, they're going to stone the woman for alleged adultery, and Jesus says, "No, let he without sin cast the first stone." These stories and these parables, I suppose, you really are. Be they the figment of someone's imagination, like they illustrate, I think, that one should try and be a good person and a better person all the time, and I think that's. And when we look at the 7 deadly sins, which I can never remember, by the way, pride, sloth, gluttony, greed, envy. There's a couple more to go, but I think they're a good illustration of how a framework by how you can aspire to be a better person, better behaved person. So is religion something, Christianity something, let's throw it out? Because remember, as we drive Christianity out, it's being replaced in many quarters, Britain among them, by Islam. And, is that something you want? So the globalist desire to drive Christianity out of everywhere, without even thinking of the collateral damage, I think is and has been and will be very harmful to all societies, Western society and Western nations, of course, among them. Now, so I've got a real problem with the way the globalist media goes after and seeks every opportunity and gloat. It's the gloating that really shits me. The gloating when there's an allegation being made, and it infects, I think, the judiciary as well. There are cases against priests that have been found, and in court cases against them where some very questionable jurisprudence has been used to. And clearly, it's a politicized attempt to go after these people with politicized, in my view, politicized prosecutors, politicized courts, politicized investigators, and so on. Now, if in an utterly impartial, independent court, the evidence supports that there was wrongdoing or indeed criminal activity, then the penalty should apply. I've got no problem with that. But just the zeal in going after these people, the Christians, it really concerns me. Coming back now to why the left particularly has a thing about the Christians, and probably even more the Catholics than the Catholic Church in Europe was really the first to feel the effects of communism, Marxism, socialism, and so on. Now, Marxism, communism, socialism was opposed to all religion. Karl Marx thought that religion was simply opiates for the masses. Was quite dismissive, but he was Jewish. He was never Christian in any meaningful sense, even though he lived in Germany or moved around Germany, then France, then Britain. But socialism, communism, Marxism, give it any name you want, even the Bolshevism in the Soviet Russia, they were they needed total ideological control of the people in order to introduce this new society. Therefore, they could not tolerate any competition for that ideological control. Religion and the family were seen as competition to it. So they were there to drive religion out and break up families and this sort of thing, and take control of people. Women would interact directly with the state, not with their husband or through the family unit. Now, communists and Marxists see this as some sort of progressive step. Progressive to what? What is the nirvana that they think is just around the corner? Are they replacing one flawed system with another one that's equally or even more flawed? Is it better than if so, how? Can someone explain that to me? I know the aspirational goal is that it's better, but has anyone delivered on that or even come close? So the Christians fought, the Catholic Church fought back, and they quite correctly identified that the biggest threats to Christianity were, of course, active socialists, but also Jews who were very prominent in the Marxist, socialist, communist activist groups, and also gay lesbian community. And so the church was it was a pitched battle, ideological battle, between on one hand Christianity in the church, particularly the Catholic Church, and on the other side, the forces of socialism and Marxism and so on, which were made up not exclusively, but primarily of dyed-in-the-wool communists, Jews, gays, and lesbians. That was on one side. In fact, that's still the paradigm today. So this was the struggle. Now, the church at the time had more influence than the socialist revolutionaries did. There was softer socialism that came in, say, in Britain, as represented by the trade unions and the Labour Party, which occurred in the 1920s. But that Britain was a Protestant society, and there was a different type of struggle for power, ideological power. The Protestant church in England wasn't struggling ideologically because the monarch was effectively the head of the church, and people communicated directly to God themselves, not through priests and bishops and the Pope and other functionaries. So there's a slightly different setup there, and so the Marxists didn't come into the direct conflict with the religion ideologically in Britain as they did in many parts of Europe. So this is something the communists have never forgiven the church for, and it was a struggle then, in the earlier days of communism and socialism, and it's still seen as it's a fight, a struggle that's never stopped. The church isn't prosecuted, the Catholic Church isn't prosecuting with anywhere near the vigor that they once did, but the incidental aspects of Catholicism or Christianity, as defined in this instance, at least through Catholicism, is the family and procreation. They frown on abortion, and if you look at the views of socialism, which is get rid of religion, get rid of the family unit, pro-abortion, LGBTQ, and all that sort of stuff, then they still see that group of if you like, revolutionaries, the gay and the lesbian and the communists and the Marxists, they perceived that they were brutally or roughly treated or disincluded, if you like, by the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church was quite a big player in stemming the tide of communism and socialism in Europe, and that's something that it's revenge. The revolutionaries are seeking revenge, and they see the Catholic Church as something and they must seek vengeance against the church, and this is why they're so keen to take potshots at it every opportunity. Now, the last thing I'll mention here is that Germany during the Nazi period pretty much allowed freedom of religion. It was unusual in that sense. The Nazis didn't attempt to impose the ideological government in anywhere near the same way as the communists and the Marxists did, or the Soviets did. They assumed that they took a more nationalistic thing of, we're all Germans here, and if your loyalty is to the country and the race, then you've got freedom, to a large extent, freedom of religion. Now, there were priests, Catholic among them, by the way, that decided to become activists against the Nazi regime, and they were warned many times, but they kept at it, or one or two of them kept at it, and that didn't work out so well for them. But nor were their rantings, I think, just looking at it, particularly accurate. But anyway, this was something that because the Nazis tolerated the Catholics, the Catholic religion, I mean, because the Nazis in fact, didn't tolerate, it wasn't an issue of do we tolerate it or not. It was allowed to continue much as it always had. And this is seen as, well, you had Nazi approval, that means you're a fascist, that means all Catholics all Catholics are Hitler, far right. And so there's that ridiculous and absurd association made. So I just want to cover that. But again, they've chosen to make one of the biggest media companies in the world has chosen to make the headline story about some priest in the middle of fucking nowhere in Australia, only because the guy is a Catholic. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.